What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another modern video. And this week we're going to be looking at the Boros burn deck, the same list that we actually took a look at on Monday, and just going to show off a few games that I played with the deck and kind of commentate and go through what I was thinking in the moment, and also go over some things that I kind of wish I would have done or thought of like in the moment as well. But before I get too deep into like this real quick deck tech and show you some of the matches and stuff, I would appreciate it if you're not already subscribed to the channel, if you go ahead and subscribe and ring the notification bell and even like the video as well. It's small things that you can do, takes 2 seconds to do, and supports my channel a lot and keeps me making content. Also, be sure to check out the deck tech of this if you want a more in-depth guide of the deck as well. If you're interested in playing Burn or just kind of want to get some ideas of maybe what you can and shouldn't do against this deck, which I'll also kind of show off in this video as well. So really quickly, the Boros Burn deck has a very simple game plan where it just wants to get your opponent's life total to 0 as fast as possible. Accomplishing that through cards like Monastery Swiftspear and Goblin Guide, which are very efficient threats at 1 mana. Monastery Swiftspear having the added bonus of having prowess, meaning that like as you cast burn spells, Swiftspear gets bigger, could be like a 3-4 power potential creature. Where Goblin Guide doesn't necessarily get bigger, but he does attack for 2 on turn 1, and the fact that your opponent can possibly get card advantage from this is nothing when this card gets in for 4 or 5 or 4 to 6 damage just on its own. Um, on top of that, you're playing some of the most efficient burn spells in the format. Lava Spike and Lightning Bolt, dealing 3 damage for 1 mana, very good. Rift Bolt and Skewer the Critics get to be in that honorary 1-drop spot. Skewer the Critics being 1 mana if you deal damage to your opponent on the same turn, or Rift Bolt, you have to wait until your next upkeep to remove the time counter from it and cast it. Um, Following all that up is the 2-drop slot, which has to put in a lot of work to make this deck, just because 2 mana does end up being a lot for this deck when you keep a lot of 1-landers. So cards like Searing Blaze that care about playing a land, getting to deal 3 damage to your opponent, 3 damage to a creature, creates a lot of tempo, especially in games where you're on the play. Eidolon punishes the decks that are trying to just kind of dirtle and cantrip. And if they just take like 1 or 2 spells, like before they kill this, they take 4 to 6 damage from this card. And while at 2 mana, like Goblin Guide, or at 1 mana, Goblin Guide can deal about the same damage as an Eidolon can. The fact that this punishes your opponent from playing spells and eventually gets them to a point where you could just lock them out of playing even more spells is very good and definitely is worth the 4 of slot in this deck. Skullcrack against some of like the dumb like elementals decks and stuff like that, like just having like 1 turn where you prevent them from gaining life is enough for the burn deck to like find that 1 turn to actually win the game and stuff. So Skullcrack, very good card. Finally, probably the best burn spell in the deck, Boros Charm, just for 2 mana, deal 4 damage. Also has some utility, giving your creature double strike or permanents you control getting indestructible if you choose to save like one of your creatures and stuff. The double strike mode almost never comes up unless you are just completely flooded on lands and cast like 16 burn spells in like a single turn to give like a Swiftspear double strike. But most of the time, like 95% of the time, probably 99 actually, 4 damage to player or planeswalker is the mode of choice for Boros Charm. Finally, 2 Lightning Helix. Deal 3 damage to any target, you gain 3 life. Still pretty good. Deals enough damage to kill a lot of the creatures that you care about to let your other creatures get through, and the life gain can kind of help you in like the mirror matches and stuff like that, or against like other aggressive decks where your opponent's trying to get in the red zone. Sideboard, Sanctifier for like the black-red, like mid-range decks, like Death Shadow and things like that. Smash the Smithereens because we want to make artifacts sad. Deflecting Palm if your opponent's just playing giant fatties and you want to just redirect the damage to them. Path to Exile, I believe, is kind of more of like a Titan thing, and probably against like Elementals as well, just as more answers to like Omnath and things like that. And Roiling Vortex to punish the people that are playing like Furies and Solitudes and Endurances and the like. Um, Also like a random hoser like against like kind of like more rogue-ish decks like Mill, people that just decide to play Fire Inventions or stuff like that. And it has this secret mode where you can pay a red and your opponents can't gain life this turn. Also very useful against like the Elementals decks and stuff like that. So that's the deck. That's the deck that I'm going to be showing off in 2 of the matches today that I have lined up for this video. So without further ado, let's go and jump right into the matches. So here we are. This is the first match that I decided to play. Um, really quickly. All right, good. That's paused. So a few things that we can recognize before we even start the match. Really, like we've already resolved mulligans and the like. We're deciding to keep this hand just because it has a lot of burn and Eidolon, usually pretty good. Um, our opponent reveals Jengatha. That signals to me that it's potentially a Death Shadow deck, and Death Shadow obviously plays a ton of like low cost spells. They're going to be doing some damage to themselves, so keeping a hand like this is going to be pretty good when we have 14 points of burn in hand and an Eidolon that we can get down on turn 2. Our mana base is very painful with 2 Sunbaked Canyons, but overall I generally like this hand against Death Shadow, and that's the kind of read I'm taking by seeing Jengatha. Um, of course, we'll find out a little bit later that my read was wrong, but it definitely isn't like super punishing. So we just go Sunbaked Canyon. We decide to suspend Rift Bolt, just see what our opponent's up to. They play Shadowborn, Shadow Spear. So, oh my goodness, stop. All right. Uh, so the previous turn, we actually just had Rift Bolt come off suspend, Rift Bolt our opponent, and then we drew a mountain for a turn, which gave us a few options. In this case, we stick to the game plan. We wanted to get down Eidolon as fast as possible, so we decided to do that on turn 2. And with the third land, we can essentially set up where if we just draw like a blank or something, we're able to play Sunbaked Canyon and deal 7 damage to our opponent, dealing 4 to us in the process, but we're also assuming that this Eidolon can get in as well. So move on. They decide to shock this into play. I think this is a mistake. I understand that they want to get the Ledger Shredder down, but and the fact that like if Ledger Shredder survives, they just equip Shadow Spear to it, and then just kind of go to town, gaining 2 life a turn, or just being able to blank this Eidolon and having to force us to use 2 burn spells. This is where 2 important decisions come, one on each side. As the burn player, this is where you have to decide if burn spells going towards your opponent's creatures are more valuable than going to your opponent's face, especially in situations like this where you have creatures. Normally, if you only have burn spells and you just have no creatures, I generally think you want the burn spells to go to the face unless the creature is going to be something that can immediately kill you and stop you from potentially just having more draw steps to try to win the game. Uh, and from the other side, it's really deciding if you want to shock lands into play because 2 life in this deck is very important. And if you're playing against burn and you understand where your life total needs to be, in order to just not die to some combination of spells. Like obviously multiples of 3 are bad because your opponent could just have lightning bolts and such. Um, Also, like when they have enough lands, you have to consider like 3s and 4s as well, just for the fact of like Boros Charm, and a lot of their damage is going to come in the form of 3 and 4 damage, um, especially from like the spell's half of it. The creatures, obviously, you're going to get like 1, maybe 2 points like the turn that they're played, and then if it's in Swift Spear's case, it could get gradually become more. So just things to keep in mind. Like when you're playing against the burn deck, do you really want to like shock? If you can help it, obviously, if our opponent has nothing better to do and it's like fetch shock versus shocking a land into play, I think shocking a land into play is fine, even though the difference between like 11 and 12 in this case technically don't matter, especially since the fact that we are staring 11 points in hand obviously matters for our opponent, but say la vie. So we'll go on. Our opponent just plays a ledger shredder past the turn. So we draw lightning bolt. So I decide here, like we're just going to lightning bolt this ledger shredder. I don't want to. I don't want it to be in play. Obviously, we have enough burn that like we're going to kill this ledger shredder, get him for 2, put them to 10, and then we're going to be able to Boros Charm, untap lightning bolt, Boros Charm is going to be our plan. And our opponent concedes to that, just that play. Either their hand had nothing to really do against an active Eidolon, the Great Rebel, or they just really didn't want to play against Burn because it's honestly matchups like these, especially with how our hand's set up, that almost whatever our opponent does on the next turn, just the fact that we get in this hit, and if they want to kill this, they end up taking another 2. They go to 8, and then 2 Boros Charms kill them, or Boros Charm plus like Lightning Bolt and stuff like that definitely puts them like in a bad spot. Especially in this case, because like I said, Boros Charm will put them to 8. We untap, and then assuming if they like kill this, they go to 6, and then we have like Boros Charm plus Bolt kills them. So there's that. Uh, Not sure what that button does. So let's go back here. Oh, probably cut all this out. All right. Metal tech. So we do that. Next game. Of course, the benefit of playing Burn is obviously winning the die roll. Because getting to go first when you're the Burn deck is really sweet. So this hand I kept just based on kind of like it's more like a speculative keep, honestly. One land, like turn one Goblin Guide is very very good with this deck, and the fact that if our opponent plays creatures, like we have a Searing Blaze, so we can go Goblin Guide into Searing Blaze, and if not, we can Lightning Bolt the creature out of the way, continue to get in with Goblin Guide. And on top of that, like just having like a creature in play is going to easily enable Skewer the Critics and essentially have it not cost 2 mana, just like with in conjunction with like a 1 mana spell and things like that. So definitely more risky keep because it is a one lander, and immediately get paid off by like drawing the land. So now that we're drawing the fetch land, we do have options. One of the options being that obviously we play the Goblin Guide first on our turn one, and then the next turn if we draw like another, like if we draw like a shock land or something like that, we could actually choose to put the shock land in play over the Arid Mesa, and that will let us Searing Blaze on that turn if we want to. But if we don't want to, then we could like say Eidolon the Great Rebel, and then we can play the Arid Mesa as our land for the next turn, not crack it, and just leave it for when they play a creature because most of the time this deck can operate on just 2 mana. Plus having an Eidolon plus a Goblin Guide in play is going to generate a lot of pressure. Um, so this is where we find out kind of what the opponent's playing. Uh, we know that they're playing Ledger Shredder, so we thought that maybe there was some kind of mid-range deck. But they reveal Academy Rector or Academy Manufacturer, which signals to me that they are some kind of like Asmo deck. Immediately, like to me, that's what this card says. Um, so now they get to play like Baubles, play like their land, crack it. They fetch shock again, which does a lot of like work for us, and they play an Emery. So this is like the perfect example that we set up where like now if we don't draw a land, like whatever, we have like the Arid Mesa set up to where we just get to do like our best like tempo play on turn two, which is just play a land, Searing Blaze this, and get in for another 2 points of damage, putting them to 10, and we have 10 points of burn in hand. So they bobble us. They see that we draw an Eidolon, which is like perfect. We go in for that. Boom. They reveal an Asmo. So now, like, we 100% confirm that they are an Asmo deck. They kill our Goblin Guide, discard a card. They fetch shock again, which, again, it just keeps putting them in like a very bad spot. So they get to do some of this. Um, so I want to go. Can I go to my turn, please? Must have tanked for a while because I assumed that this was actually going to be pretty quick. Okay, so here we are on our turn. We draw another Skewer the Critics. So here, there's a few options. And this is stuff that you constantly have to be thinking of. Because again, like with this deck, a lot of the thought process is, where do these burn spells go? I could send a bolt to the Asmo, but then I kind of lock the Skewer the Critics I have in hand. Just makes them super awkward. Or I could bolt them to 4 and then use a Skewer to kill an Asmo, and I lock one Skewer the Critics in hand. Or I could just send both at their face. They go to 1. We know that they can make a food. And it's only really bad if they tap Underworld Cookbook to make a food, untap, make another food, and they have another land. And then they can just gain 6 life and negate the damage I did with these 2 burn spells. But then they have no cards in hand, and they have like a 3-power thing, and eventually like our burn is going to catch up with like their life and stuff like that. So that's the play I decided to make. I decided to bolt them, skewer them, and then if they have the absolute worst where they get to like make a food, which they don't, they end up unearthing a manufacturer. They go make a food, they crack the food after they make a ton of things with this Academy manufacturer. I should have gotten their deck list because this deck is sweet and it might be one I go over next week. But basically, our opponent let themselves dead. Because obviously they fetch shock so many times. I mean, they did 6 damage to themselves. Like if they just like fetch basics or whatever, they're at 8 life instead of 4, and it's a lot harder to kill them from there. Like even if I draw a land, like Skewer the Critics, Boros Charm only puts them to 1. And that's kind of the things you have to keep in mind when you're playing against Burn. And I really cannot stress that point enough. Um, that's the things you have to keep in mind, and that's what you have to do. So they attack us, whatever, doesn't really matter. And then we just get to untap and kill them. I mean, there's nothing that they can really do. Um, unless they had like Solitude or something like that. And here we go, like we drew a land, so like now we just get to deal 7 to them. So even if they could somehow like gain another 3 life, like if they had like they only have 1 card in hand, so it really doesn't matter. There's really nothing there that they could do to like save themselves unless they had like Healing Salve or something like that. But I doubt that this deck is playing that card, so Boros Charm just gets us the win there. So that's the first match. I'm gonna show a second one because in this match, I found out that instead of Monastery Swift Spear, I had Monastery Mentor in the deck, which actually would have been kind of sweet to be able to play, just with the number of cheap spells that you can play with this deck. But obviously not optimal. So the next match I'm going to show is actually going to have Swift Spears in the deck. So even with the suboptimal version of Burn, technically we still were able to win that game, even after our opponent did gain 3 life. So uh, stick around. I'll be back with the second match here in a moment.